My name is Pascal Elahi from the Pawsey Supercomputing Center, and I will be talking to you today about accessing Acacia, our object storage system. Now, the focus of this video is to summarize the steps to prepare for and then access the Acacia Object Storage Service, and discuss the importance of access keys and how to create such keys. We're also going to discuss how to keep Acacia secure through the use of good S3 security practices, and summarize at the end how you will access Acacia using S3 compatible clients. Now, in this on the slide, in the image, you'll see the backplane of Acacia. So this is the object storage system that has a high-speed interconnect and also very good connection speeds to Photonics itself. So Acacia is readily accessible through a wide variety of platforms. You can access it through Photonics. You can also access through other infrastructure at Pawsey, such as Nimbus, or even the visualization systems. And it's also accessible from the world. So you can access it from your home institute. You can even share data to other users who don't have access to Pawsey infrastructure through Acacia. So how do I access it? Well, to prepare for access, you must complete two steps. One is to set up the Acacia security credentials. So this will set up keys for access, which you then would use to provide to clients. And then those clients would allow you access to the Acacia data, the data that's located on the Acacia storage system. This video will introduce you to those two steps and will illustrate some access of Acacia. So step one is setting up the Acacia security credentials. So authentication to Acacia is slightly different from other infrastructure that you might have used. Acacia uses security credentials automatically generated on origin that set up keys for access. The Acacia security credential comes in two parts. There's a pair, right? So there's the Acacia access ID, which is visible on origin and normally is not needs to be secured as safeguarded as much as the other one. And the other one is the secret key, which we display only once on origin. So you must capture and record it for future use in some fashion. Security credentials are specific to each user and each project. So as a user, you'll have a user storage space on Acacia, and projects will also have their own storage space on Acacia, and each are accessed with different access IDs, and then also different security keys associated with those access IDs. So where do you go on Origin? So if you go on Origin and you log in, you'll notice in the tabs, there is an Acacia tab. And then on that Acacia tab, you can manage your Acacia keys. And this will manage the access to all the storage points that you have access to. So your user storage and any project storage that you are associated with. The idea is then to set up your first access key and view the keys that you also can view keys that you've already set up. You can have up to 5 keys. We could have set up more, but 5 keys is really quite a reasonable amount because 1 key gives you full access to whatever storage space you're using. The link for Origin is in the slides and is on the documentation for Pawsey. So, creating an access key. So how do you create it? Well, if you go into the Manage a Key panel, right, the Acacia keys, you'll see the ability to create new keys and also view older keys and delete them, as it were. You create a new key. This key will then open up a new window in which you'll see an access ID and a secret key, right? So the access ID is a smaller string. The secret key is a much longer hash, and the secret key is the one that will only be displayed once. Now, on the Origin interface, we will also provide examples of how to set up configurations for the various S3 clients that we support. So rclone, AWS. You just need to click on the tab and follow the instructions and copy the information from there to the appropriate configuration file for that client. And it's at this point, right, this is the only chance to record the secret key. So once this is closed and you close this tab, you will never get access to that secret key, right? And if you don't have that set up, you would have to delete this access ID and the secret key associated with it and create a new one, right? So make sure you record your key so you can actually access Acacia. So how do you keep your keys safe, right? They do give full nominal write access and read access to the data that's in that storage space. So do not embed access keys directly into your code. Do not keep the same access key indefinitely. It's a good idea to refresh if possible. You don't have to do it often, but it's a good idea to refresh keys. And do not keep access keys that you no longer have active use for. So if you have created a couple of keys and one has been sitting unused for a year, you really should be deleting it because that would still provide full access to that storage space. The good practices are is to use your S3 client to put the access key into a known location that is effectively only readable by you. Use environment variables to store credentials also, again, that would be very closely safeguarded, so only accessible by you. And we would suggest also to change access keys. Same thing like passwords, periodically change access key to maintain security and delete them once they are no longer in use. There's actually documentation on best practices, and these best practices for Acacia access essentially are good best practices for all access to any sort of type of object storage system in which you generate these type of keys. Now that you've got keys, you want to actually make use of them. So this is to set up the client access to the Acacia storage system. So communication is done through S3 compatible clients, right? S3 compatible clients, there's a few of them, and there's actually also some clients that provide S3 interfaces, but are not designed necessarily for pure S3 access. You do not communicate directly through Acacia, so it's not like a file system in which you can directly put stuff through commands like SCP, typically use clients. Well, there are many clients to choose from, and you're welcome to choose any of those, but we at Pawsey support a few, specifically because we've tested it for the Acacia system. The S3 is a communication protocol that has become an industry standard for communicating between object storage services and other file infrastructure. And you use this S3 client as your vehicle in which to retrieve and manage storage, manage metadata of that, manage the metadata of the data that you put there from anywhere at any time, right? So you don't actually have to be on Pawsey systems to access the S3 clients on the Pawsey system to manage the data. You could use your own laptop as well to manage the data that exists on Acacia. So what S3 compatible client should I use? Well, there's a variety out there, but Pawsey supports two that have command line interfaces, Arclone and AWS, the AWS CLI specifically. These clients are available on Pawsey systems, and you may need to install in your own home system, and you'll have to copy the configuration you use on Pawsey for those other systems because the configuration basically provides the access. We currently recommended Arclone because it's got good performance, it's robust, and it has commands similar to those you would be familiar with if you use Linux, such as copy and ls. There are other out there that you can use, but these are our current recommendations, particularly for the using on Cetonix itself. So how does security work, right? So you have this S3 interfaces. A user logs into Acacia using their S3 compatible client that retrieves this access key and also the secret key associated with it. And based on the access key, the S3 interacts with the Acacia, allowing access to permitted buckets. So if you have multiple storage areas, like your user storage space and your project storage space, the access to that space is defined by the access key that you're using to access that space. So here in example, user A has access to the red bucket and the objects in that bucket. And user B has access to the orange and blue buckets and objects that are inside. In terms of Acacia, in terms of the internal storage, they're laid out just as objects anywhere, but it's the access path that grants you specific access to specific buckets and objects that exist there. So you can only access the buckets you have permission for. You can't even see the ones you don't have permissions to see, as it were, if they exist on a different storage space. All users with a permission to the bucket have essentially the same permissions. So it is a flat hierarchy of permissions at least by default. So if a user has access to a project space and has read-write access, all the users that have access to that project would have read-write access to that project space. You can set bucket or object level permissions, but that's an advanced topic and that's not covered in this video. So now let's get to example commands. So client installation on your own computer, if you wanted to access Acacia through your own home system, you can download Arclone and run the installation script. We also provide PShell, which is the Pawsey essentially interface for the data storage systems. And that requires Python greater than 3.6 and Baudo3, which is a Python library, to be installed locally. And then you can clone this specific interface that we provide internally for moving data around and use that as well. Now for the configuration, this is an example configuration file. The idea is that you add this file, at least for Arclone, in a .config arclone conf path. It's used in the home directory. And you can see in the example that we've got here, we've got making the directory because it might not exist. And then you'll see this set plus O history, and that is to turn off the recording of the history of the commands you're placing in, because if you copy the configuration will contain the access key and also the secret access key. So they would be then possibly stored in a history, which could then be possibly accessed elsewhere. So we're turning off and then back on the history of your bash commands in this example, and copying the information where you see that there is an Acacia dash project name in italics. That project name would be whatever you choose. The type has to be S3, and the provider is Ceph, because that's what Acacia is running, is Ceph S3 storage, object storage. The endpoint is also fixed, and the access ID here is what we generate on origin, and this provides access to that specific storage space. Once this is done, you can then use rclone to list the remotes that are available, and it will tell you what it's been configured to access. You can check the functionality of rclone by just listing the remotes and seeing what interfaces there are. So rclone lists remotes, and I put -- long, which tells you the interfaces that are available. So you can see S3. You could use rclone to also chat to other object storages like Dropbox, etc. So if you wanted to, you can configure it for more than just Acacia. But here we've just configured it for Acacia, and it's specifically, essentially implied here, an access to an Acacia project space, not a user space. Now, actual access. So configuration, you've configured your Acacia setup and you want to start doing something. When you're configuring a client, you're already interacting with Acacia. So you're already setting it up, and it allows you to then start communicating essentially immediately. So you can start looking at trying to construct buckets or objects and looking at what's inside buckets and looking at the objects that exist there through these following simple commands. So rclone has a make dir, so it's exactly like this Linux make directory. And then it has the alias name. This is the name that we provided as the configuration name. So Acacia project name, there's a colon, and then bucket names. And so you would construct buckets. These are collections which objects live in. And so it's like a directory. It's not exactly a directory, right? But it's similar to a directory in terms of how you would view organization of some objects. They can have a quick reminder based on video 1, that buckets cannot have sub-buckets. So it's a single level sort of directory structure. But you can look at inside the bucket, create a bucket, look inside with LSD, right? That will tell you what's inside the bucket. You can even look in a more structured format with the example of tree, where here I've put in some things inside the bucket so we can actually see some organization of date stamps and file names and so on. And you can see the interface that's there. And you can then remove the bucket. You can also remove objects as well, but remove dir would remove the bucket and essentially the objects inside. Typically, there might be some complaints about not empty buckets, but we'll chat about that in later videos. And that's also a full discussion of all these commands and how to use it is in our documentation. But this provides quick access. So in review, we've discussed how to set up Acacia access. So, right, you go onto Origin, you use your Pawsey username and password, and then you can go to the tab to say Managing Acacia and set up access keys. And this access key, right, this Origin interface is critical because the information that's provided is essentially provided only once to critically provide access to Acacia. After setting up your access key, you'll need to configure the client, possibly install it if you are installing it on your own systems to communicate with Acacia. And then once these steps are complete, you essentially access it through these clients, rclone, that would provide you, ability to manipulate data, move data, retrieve, put data, and so on. And just something to note that actually access to an object can be provided to any computer with internet access. You'd have to have the client, the access keys. It's also possible to share data even without those, but those would just be sharing data. And that again is discussed in our documentation. So it's important to remember that the buckets you have can access in Acacia is determined by access keys and policies. And by default, the policies provide everybody who has the access key equal access to that bucket. The access key is essentially the user, right? And so it looks, as far as the Acacia is concerned, if someone has the same access key and the associated secret key, they are the same point of access and they have the same permissions as you would. Thank you for listening. Have a good day.